Wardrobe malfunctions that actors still regret. Costumes are an integral part of every movie, lending authenticity to the story and creating a more truthful representation. However, even seasoned costume designers make mistakes, and while these errors can sometimes go unnoticed, there are eagle-eyed viewers who can identify the inconsistencies. Here are mistakes and wardrobe malfunctions that actors still regret. Jeans in Cairo. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first film in the Steven Spielberg adventure series, was almost perfect until someone appears who shouldn't be in there. In a scene where Indiana is drinking in a small cafe, a guy passes behind him over his right shoulder in the screen wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. The movie's set in the 1930s in Cairo, Egypt, where this normal, everyday garb was not worn. A digital watch in the 1860s. Glory depicts the horrors of the American Civil War. Set in 1863, the film mistakenly forgot to remind the extra who played a soldier to remove his watch before filming, and it shows briefly on the screen. No kilts for you. Braveheart was an epic, yet not so historically accurate film. The Scottish fighters in the film were wearing kilts in spite of the fact that the film was set during the 13th century. Kilts didn't become popular until 300 years later. The shorts were too short. In Dirty Dancing, Jennifer Grey's character, Baby, can be seen dancing in jean shorts. The film was set in 1963, but those type of shorts didn't come into popularity until the 1970s. Two old armors. The Last Samurai was set in 1870. Naturally, the warriors in the film were made to wear samurai armor, but not the kind that were worn during the time the era depicted. The costume armors were antiquated because they were worn about 200 years prior. The hair. In The Other Boleyn Girl, the character of Anne Boleyn is played by Natalie Portman. Although she wore the right hood, her hair wasn't tied back under it. Instead, she was allowed to wear her hair loose, hanging beyond her shoulders. This was not considered acceptable at the time. No razors. The women depicted in Schindler's List all had smooth armpits and legs. However, they were kept imprisoned in concentration camps where no one had access to basic hygiene products. A guitar from the future. In Back to the Future, Marty McFly plays Johnny B. Goode using a Gibson ES345 in a key scene. However, the movie was set in 1955, and the ES345 was only made starting in 1958. The scarlet color. Pirates of the Caribbean movies were set in the 1720s. In the film, the British military are dressed in scarlet coats. Unfortunately, these uniforms weren't issued until about 20 years later. A Cowboy Pirate. Still in the Pirates of the Caribbean film, a scene on board the Black Pearl showed Jack Sparrow and fellow pirates in their pirate garb. However, a lone cowboy can be seen over the captain's right shoulder wearing a cowboy hat and a white shirt. Chained, Unchained. In The Empire Strikes Back, Han Solo is shown shackled, then he's shown unshackled and shackled again in the same scene. In the scene where he gets frozen, the shackles are absent. In another scene, he's not wearing a jacket but was immediately wearing one after. Dorothys Hair. Dorothy's hair in The Wizard of Oz was rather inconsistent in length. In some scenes it appears quite long, and in other scenes it appears medium length. Sometimes her hair would appear in different lengths in alternating shots. Too early for shades. Django, the protagonist in Django Unchained, wore those super cool round sunglasses. However, the film was set in 1858, and the glasses weren't available yet. This was a deliberate move on the part of Quentin Tarantino, though. Purple is not your color. In Pompeii, many of the wealthy characters wore purple robes. However, the color purple was made only to be worn by nobles because it was an expensive dye to manufacture. In fact, Emperor Nero appropriated the color for himself exclusively and prohibited its use by anyone else under penalty of death. Another witness from another time. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, a crew member can be seen in the duel scene, standing with other students. He's barely noticeable because the area is darkened, but if you look hard enough, he could clearly be seen. Nice hair, messy hair. Sam Neill's character can be seen with smooth hair in one shot. Immediately after, his hair appears messy from another angle. The wrong lapels. The lapels of the suit that Kevin Costner's character wore in The Untouchables could clearly be seen to be the type that were popular in the 80s. However, the film was set during the 1930s, when lapels were much bigger and quite pointy. Characters teleport. During the final shootout scene in The Mummy, Rick is flanked by Jonathan to his left and Ardith to his right. When the shot changed angles, the two men switched sides. Roman jeans. In the movie Gladiator, an extra appearing among the crowd in the Colosseum was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. This was at the time when even the men didn't wear pants. Maximus shorts. In a duel scene in the Colosseum in Gladiator, Maximus, played by Russell Crowe, falls to the ground. He rolls over to get up, but as he does so, his black sports shorts could be seen under his clothing. He should have been wearing an undergarment called a sublegaculum or loincloth. Girl fight in a dress and heels. Michelle Rodriguez is one tough girl, and she plays one of many in her films The Fast and Furious 7. She and former MMA champion Ronda Rousey fight while wearing gowns and high heels. The dresses, particularly Michelle's, got torn as a result. Big hair is missing. From the women of the 80s, big hair was big. This was why Drew Barrymore's hair in The Wedding Singer was a bit of an anachronism because she was sporting a short, below-the-ear cut with flipped ends that was so 90s. Shoulders showing. Orlando Bloom was wearing a tunic in a scene on a boat with Eric Bana, who played his brother. In one take, Bloom's left shoulder was more exposed. Immediately after, his tunic covers it without showing his character making the proper adjustments. Umbrellas in Troy. Troy was a respectable box office hit, but it didn't impress all the critics. This wardrobe malfunction is actually a mistake by researchers who should have known that the umbrella, used for the street scene where Paris and Helen are paraded through the Trojan streets, wasn't invented until about 800 years after Troy was sacked. Too sexy clothing. Even for women who worked as prostitutes during the era depicted on Jonah Hex, Lila Black's character, played by Megan Fox, was not wearing appropriate clothing. The corset she wore would have been considered too revealing, even for her profession. Almost Famous Ozzy. In one scene in Almost Famous, a character was sporting a Black Sabbath t-shirt. Although Black Sabbath was formed in 1968 and the film was set in the 1970s, the particular t-shirt worn in the film didn't come out of the factory until 1997, so it should not have made an appearance there. War medals before the actual war. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, a few German officers make an appearance wearing their uniforms and the medals they won. This is well and good, but the film is set in 1938, well before World War II began, which means that these officers shouldn't have these medals because they haven't earned them yet. The War on Stockings. Director Michael Bay is not exactly known for placing a premium on historical accuracy, but there are still some viewers who complain about the women who appeared on Pearl Harbor. Set during World War II, the film depicted women who didn't wear stockings. At the time, nylon stockings were considered de rigueur accessories for women who wouldn't have stepped out of the house without putting them on. Your hair is showing, Peggy. A heroine in her own right, Captain America's Peggy Carter was strong, smart, and dressed sharp. However, she still had to follow certain rules for women in the armed services, and that included the way she wore her hair. In real life, Peggy's hair should have been tied up away from her shoulders while in uniform. In the film, her hair was down. The Pride Boots. Wellington boots are a beloved English accessory. While sturdy and reliable for prancing around in the wet British fields, Wellingtons were not manufactured until 4 decades after they made an appearance in Pride and Prejudice, starring Keira Knightley. Boot up, soldier! In Saving Private Ryan, some soldiers were seen wearing brown boots, while others had black boots on. The black boots would have been fine, except that they weren't manufactured until the 1950s, years after the war. The King's Kilt. Colin Firth won accolades for his performance as King George VI in The King's Speech. In one scene, he was seen wearing a kilt, which would have been fine because designated British royals did wear them. However, the kilt was Irish. As head of the British monarchy, the king should have been wearing a Scottish kilt. Futuristic headsets. In Captain America, we're introduced to Jim Merida, an ally to Cap. In one scene, Merida is shown with a headset on. Although the film depicted life in the 1940s with some sci-fi flavor, the headset worn would have been too technically advanced for the time. Electrifying Lamps. Gone with the Wind is one of Hollywood's most beloved epic films. Set in the American Civil War, the film showed lamps lighted by electricity. In some scenes, the cords connecting the lamps to an outlet could even be seen. First house in America to use electricity was lighted up in 1882. Scarlett's Terra Plantation was shown from 1861 to around 1877. Bras in the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar was made in 1953, but it was set during the years of his dictatorship, which would have been 49 BC. Women at the time would not have been wearing bras, but they were in the film. The bras were evidently 1950s style due to their pointy designs. 60s braces. Braces already existed in the 1960s, but in Catch Me If You Can, Amy Adams' character was wearing the type of wired metal braces that were available only in the 1970s. American Hustle Rolex Watch. American Hustle depicted the 1970s so well, but not perfectly. In one scene, Stoddard Thorson, played by Louis C.K., was shown wearing a large Rolex watch, which would have been okay, but this model came out of the factory floor, so to speak, in 2010. Zip up, Amadeus. The 1984 tale of Amadeus is a beloved film depicting the life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, mainly from the point of view of his supposed rival, Salieri. Mozart lived from 1756 to 1791, but some scenes showed characters wearing zipped-up clothing. Zips weren't a thing until 1913. My Girl's Ring. My Girl was a 1991 coming-of-age film about a young girl named Vana whose father owned a funeral home. The story begins in 1973, and the girl wore a mood ring in the film. The ring, while important, is not right for the time because it wasn't made available until 1975. Firefighters in Gangs. Gangs of New York was a noted Scorsese film about the turbulent 1800s. In a scene showing firefighters, the men seemed to be wearing firefighting gear that appeared too advanced for the time period. Singin' in a Pink Dress. Singin' in the Rain is a beloved classic, and as lovely as Debbie Reynolds was in the film, she wore a dress that didn't seem right for the setting, which was the 1920s, a time when women wore clothes that were loose and didn't show off their figures. Reynolds' character wore a pink strap dress with a full tulle skirt that was more of the fashion of the 1950s. Clip-on Purple. 1983's The Color Purple was an Oscar-winning film that earned worldwide respect. In one scene, Albert, played by Danny Glover, wore a clip-on tie. Although the tie was appropriate, the clip-on design wasn't. The events in the film were supposed to have occurred in 1916. The clip-on tie wasn't available until 1928. Tie, untie. In Pretty Women, Edward's tie was untied by Vivian, but in the next frame, the tie appears knotted. In the next, it's untied once again. Brad's good head of hair. Brad Pitt had nice hair, but wore it long in Legends of the Fall. a film set in the early 1900s. Men of his stature during the era wore their hair short and would not be caught without a good facial shave. Riding helmets, straps. In Seabiscuit, a film about one of the greatest horses to ever race, Toby Maguire played the jockey Red Pollard. During the riding scenes, Maguire was wearing helmets featuring chin straps. The film was set during the Depression era, and those chin straps didn't become popular until 20 years later. Ladies in Mars. The film John Carter was based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess on Mars. In the book, the character of Deja Torres wore a skimpy clothing. In the film, however, she's depicted in a relatively tame but still sexy clothing. If the book version was followed, however, much wardrobe malfunction would have occurred. Anne Boleyn's neck. The TV series The Tudors depicted the life of the adult Henry VIII in the 15th century. The women's costumes, however, were a bit risque thanks to the neck ruffs they wore. For women of noble birth, these ruffs would have been considered scandalous. Military name tags. Good Night and Good Luck was set during the 1950s. Some scenes showed Air Force members using name tags. Unfortunately, name tags weren't used in military uniforms until 1967. Sensible nappies. The 1995 film adaptation of Sense and Sensibility was near perfect in its costume depiction, except for one, the baby diaper. The baby in the scene was wearing what looked like a modern nappy, something that wouldn't have been used in the 1800s. Nike spikes. The 2009 film The Informant was set in 1992 until 1994. However, some of its characters were shown to have been wearing golf spikes made by Nike. These spikes were only produced beginning in 1996.